Amelia Grant had everything that most people only dreamed of. At 33, she was the owner of one of the fastest-growing companies in the city. Her name often appeared in magazines and business reports, praised for her brilliance and determination. Yet, behind the glossy photographs and the public image of a woman who had conquered the corporate world, Amelia carried a quiet emptiness that few ever saw. Success had come at a cost. She had never married, never given herself the time to explore love in any real way. Work had always been her partner, and ambition her closest friend. Her office was located at the very top floor of a glass building, overlooking the skyline. Every morning, as employees rushed through the doors below, Amelia would stand by the window of her spacious room, holding a cup of black coffee, and watch life unfold. From the outside, she seemed untouchable, a powerful figure who had no weakness, no personal longing. But inside, she knew the truth. She had built an empire, but not a home. Among the hundreds of employees who worked for her, there was one who began to catch her attention more than she cared to admit. Marcus Reed had joined the company only 6 months earlier. He was unlike anyone else in her world of polished executives and formal board meetings. Marcus was a tall, strong man of African descent, with a quiet confidence that came not from wealth or status but from hard work and resilience. He wasn't a manager or a high-level strategist. His role was simple, yet his presence carried weight. People liked him. He had an ease about him that Amelia couldn't ignore. At first, she noticed him in passing, moving through the building, always focused, always respectful. But gradually, she found herself lingering on the sight of him longer than she should. His laugh, deep and unforced, would drift through the halls sometimes, and she would pause, listening without meaning to. For a woman who had trained herself to stay detached, the awareness unsettled her. One afternoon, Amelia had been reviewing files late in her office when she realized she needed a particular report from the archives. Rather than sending an assistant, she called Marcus, knowing he was responsible for organizing that department. When he entered her office, there was no grand moment, no spark of lightning, only a quiet shift in the air that neither of them could quite explain. He greeted her politely, his voice low and steady, and handed her the file she had requested. Their eyes met briefly, and for just a second, Amelia felt as though he could see past her polished exterior, past the walls she had built to protect herself. "Thank you," she said, her tone more gentle than she intended. Marcus nodded. "Of course, ma'am. Any time." The conversation ended there, yet something lingered after he left. Amelia sat at her desk longer than usual that evening, staring at the closed door, unsettled by the way his presence had affected her. Days passed, and Amelia told herself it was nothing. She buried herself in meetings, projects, and endless decisions. But the truth was harder to ignore. Every time she saw Marcus in the corridors or heard his voice among the staff, her heart reacted in ways she could not control. She reminded herself that she was his employer, that she had a responsibility, that allowing her emotions to drift this way was dangerous. But loneliness has a way of silencing reason. One evening, as the office grew quiet and most employees had left, Amelia was still at her desk, reviewing contracts. To her surprise, Marcus appeared at the door carrying a stack of documents that needed her signature. He hesitated before entering, as if uncertain whether to disturb her. She gestured for him to step inside. "You work late," she remarked, her voice softer than usual. He smiled faintly. "So do you." The simplicity of the exchange made her chest tighten. For a moment, the formal roles of employer and employee faded, replaced by something more human, more fragile. They spoke a little longer than necessary that evening, nothing remarkable, only casual words about work and life, but the atmosphere felt charged, as though every sentence carried an unspoken meaning. When Marcus left, Amelia remained seated, her thoughts restless. She told herself she must stay in control. She had always been in control. Yet, the thought of him kept circling back, slipping into her mind at unexpected moments. She found herself watching the elevator at times, waiting to see him step out. She caught herself imagining his expression, his voice, his presence in her office again. For the first time in years, Amelia felt alive in a way that frightened her. It wasn't just attraction, it was the reminder that beneath her title, beneath her achievements, she was still a woman who longed for connection. And Marcus, without even trying, had awakened that part of her. That night, she lay awake in her apartment, staring at the ceiling. The city outside her window buzzed with lights and noise, but inside, silence pressed down like a weight. She thought of her life, the long hours, the sacrifices, the way she had convinced herself she didn't need anyone. And yet, all it had taken was one man's presence to unravel the story she had built about herself. By the time she finally closed her eyes, Amelia knew something had shifted. She didn't fully understand what it meant, nor where it would lead. All she knew was that Marcus Reed was no longer just another employee in her company. He was a thought she couldn't escape, a quiet force that had begun to change the rhythm of her days. And though she tried to resist it, she sensed that this was only the beginning of a dangerous path, one that might lead her to places she had never intended to go. The days that followed carried a strange rhythm I had never known before. My mornings began with the same routine: coffee brewing in the kitchen, David leaving early with a distracted kiss on my cheek, and the house falling into its heavy silence. But now, there was something new lingering in my thoughts. I found myself listening for footsteps outside, waiting for that knock on the door, or glancing through the window to see if Ethan might pass by. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, something that lived in the small spaces of my day. I started noticing details about him that I hadn't before: the way his hands moved when he worked, the quiet focus in his eyes, the warmth of his smile when he allowed himself to show it. Those details etched themselves into my mind, growing heavier with each passing moment. One afternoon, I saw him walking by, and without thinking, I called out his name. He turned, hesitant as always, but when he stepped closer, I felt my heart skip in a way that embarrassed me. I asked him if he had time for tea, and he nodded, almost shyly, as though the invitation itself was something fragile. We sat across from each other at the small wooden table in my kitchen. I poured the tea, my hands trembling slightly though I tried to hide it. Our conversation was simple. He told me a little about his family, his studies, his plans. But beneath those words, there was a current I couldn't ignore. Every time his gaze met mine, I felt a warmth spread through me, a warmth I hadn't felt in years. There was a moment when our hands brushed as I passed him the sugar, and the touch lingered longer than it should have. It was nothing, really, just skin against skin, but it sent a shiver through me. I pulled my hand back quickly, trying to laugh it off, but inside I was shaken. That single touch had said more than an entire conversation could. I told myself again and again that it was harmless. But harmless things don't make your heart race when you're alone in bed at night, replaying every look, every word, every brush of the hand. Harmless things don't make you choose your clothes more carefully before stepping outside, hoping he might notice. Harmless things don't make you feel alive when you had almost forgotten what it meant. It wasn't long before our moments together grew longer. Sometimes he helped me carry groceries in, sometimes he stayed just a little too long after fixing something around the house. And each time, the silence between us grew heavier, filled with something unsaid yet undeniably present. One evening, as the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, we found ourselves walking together down the quiet street. The world felt softer somehow, the air heavy with the kind of stillness that invites confessions. I told him how I often felt invisible, how years of marriage had made me question if I was still the same woman I once was. He listened, really listened, without judgment or interruption. And when he finally spoke, his words were simple but pierced straight into me. "You're not invisible," he said softly. "You're more present than you realize." I didn't know how to respond. My throat tightened, and I could only look away, because in that moment I knew exactly what was happening. My heart was leaning toward him, and every rational thought I had was losing its grip. That night, I sat awake while David slept beside me, his steady breathing filling the room. I stared at the ceiling, torn between guilt and longing. I hadn't crossed any line physically, but my heart had already betrayed him. I had already begun giving pieces of myself to someone else, and the weight of it pressed heavily against me. The next time Ethan came by, the air between us was different. It wasn't just unspoken tension anymore, it was something undeniable. We sat close on the couch, talking quietly about nothing and everything, and there was a moment when his arm brushed against mine. Neither of us moved away. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, and I let myself lean just slightly closer, almost without realizing it that I knew it was dangerous, but I didn't pull back. For years, I had been starved of touch, of closeness, of intimacy that was more than just routine. And here it was, tempting me in the most subtle yet powerful way. When our eyes met, the world seemed to pause. There was no kiss, no grand gesture, just a look, long and unbroken, that said everything we couldn't. In that silence, I felt exposed, vulnerable, but also more alive than I had in a long time. My pulse quickened, and for a moment, I almost forgot to breathe, and yet, the guilt didn't vanish. It lingered, waiting for me in the quiet moments after Ethan left. I found myself caught between two lives, the one I had built with David, safe and predictable but empty, and the one I was secretly creating with Ethan, thrilling but dangerous. Martha noticed it again one afternoon when we met for coffee. She leaned across the table, her eyes sharp, and asked if there was someone else. I froze, almost spilling my cup, before shaking my head too quickly. But she saw it in my face, in the hesitation I couldn't hide. She didn't push, though. She simply sighed and said, "Be careful, Clara. Temptation always feels sweet, but it leaves a bitter aftertaste." Her words echoed in my mind long after, but they didn't stop me. By then, it was too late. I had already crossed a line in my heart, a line I couldn't erase. I told myself I could still control it, that I wouldn't let it go further, but deep down, I knew control was slipping through my fingers. The truth was simple: I wanted Ethan. Not just his presence, not just his quiet comfort, I wanted the way he made me feel. Desired. Seen. Alive, and in that wanting, I knew I was risking everything. The following days were heavier than before. It was as if every corner of the house carried a memory of what almost happened, every silence between words was thick with unspoken truths. I tried to go about my life as if nothing had changed, but the truth was, everything had. Ethan's presence haunted me even when he wasn't around. The way his eyes had lingered, the way his hand had rested on mine, the way my body had betrayed me with its yearning, it all lingered in my thoughts like an echo I couldn't silence. Michael's behavior, too, began to shift. There was a sharpness in his gaze whenever Ethan was mentioned, a subtle but undeniable awareness that something was not quite right. He teased less and watched more, his smiles feeling heavier, edged with suspicion. I found myself avoiding his eyes, afraid that he would see too much. Afraid he already had. One evening, when Ethan had not been around for a few days, Michael found me in the kitchen. I was drying dishes, lost in thought, when he leaned against the counter, his arms folded across his chest. "You've been quiet lately," he said casually, but his tone carried a weight that made me uneasy. I offered him a faint smile, brushing off his comment, but he didn't move. "Emily," he said after a pause, his voice lower now. "I've seen the way you look at him." My heart stopped. The plate in my hand slipped slightly, and I had to grip it tightly to keep from dropping it. I forced a laugh, tried to dismiss it, but Michael's eyes didn't waver. He took a step closer, his presence filling the small space between us. "Don't bother denying it. You don't look at me that way." "Not usually." His words struck something I wasn't prepared for. The air seemed to thicken, and before I could respond, he reached out and gently touched my arm. His hand was warm, steady, and though I should have pulled away, I froze. "Daniel's not here," he whispered, his voice trembling ever so slightly. "And I can't pretend anymore." I backed away, searching for words, my chest tight with panic and confusion. "Michael, this isn't right," I managed to say. But my voice lacked conviction. My own heart betrayed me again, fluttering with a mix of fear and something I couldn't name. Michael stepped closer, his eyes fixed on mine. "Maybe not," he admitted. "But it's real. And you feel it too." His hand brushed against mine, lingering in the same way Ethan's had. My breath caught. For a moment, it felt as though I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground shifting beneath me, temptation pulling me down. I closed my eyes, wishing the moment away, but instead, it deepened. His hand slid into mine fully, fingers interlocking, and I felt the rush of heat in my chest, the dangerous comfort of being wanted. For a second that stretched like eternity, I let it happen. I let the silence wrap around us, let his closeness fill the empty space inside me, but guilt hit me like a wave, pulling me back. I pulled my hand away abruptly, turning from him, my voice barely a whisper. I can't do this. My shoulders trembled, the weight of everything pressing down. Michael didn't push further. He stood still behind me, silent, but I could feel his eyes on my back. The room felt suffocating, and I wanted nothing more than to escape. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was torn in pieces, Ethan's gentle honesty, Michael's bold confession, Daniel's trusting voice in my memory. I was caught between loyalty and desire, between what I knew was right and what my heart had already begun to crave. The loneliness I once thought was unbearable had now been replaced by something far more dangerous, a web of temptation that threatened to consume me. The next day, Ethan came again. He arrived while Michael was out, and the moment I opened the door to see him standing there, my resolve cracked. His eyes softened when they met mine, and without a word, he stepped inside. The silence was heavy, but this time there was no pretense, no shield of casual conversation. We both knew what was lingering between us, that we sat across from each other, the distance between us filled with tension. I tried to look away, but his gaze held me captive. "You've been on my mind," he admitted softly. His voice carried no hesitation, no disguise. My heart raced, the truth in his words striking me with both fear and longing that I wanted to tell him to stop, to walk away before it was too late. But instead, I found myself leaning closer, my voice barely audible. "You shouldn't say that." Yet even as the words left my lips, my body betrayed me, inching toward him, drawn by a gravity I couldn't resist. When his hand found mine again, this time I didn't pull away. I let the warmth sink in, let the moment swallow me whole. The world outside didn't exist, there was only his touch, the thundering of my heart, the unspoken confession between us. We didn't need words. Everything was there in the silence, in the closeness, in the quiet surrender of two people who had crossed too many lines already, but just as quickly as it began, it shattered. The sound of the front door opening, Michael's voice calling my name, sent us both reeling back. Ethan rose abruptly, his eyes filled with regret and urgency. "I'll go," he whispered, and before I could stop him, he was gone, slipping out the back door as Michael's footsteps echoed closer. That I stood frozen in the living room, my breath uneven, my hands trembling. Michael entered, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the room. He said nothing, but his silence was louder than any accusation. I knew he suspected. Maybe he had even heard enough. That night, the guilt consumed me entirely. I felt trapped in a nightmare of my own making, caught between two men I should never have allowed into my heart. Daniel's call came unexpectedly, his voice filled with warmth and excitement. "Emily," he said, "I have good news. I'll be coming home soon." My throat closed, and I could barely respond. The joy in his words clashed violently with the storm inside me. He was coming back, the man I had promised myself to, the man who trusted me beyond measure. Yet all I could think of was how I had betrayed that trust, even if only in moments, even if only in emotions I had never meant to feel. As the call ended, I stared into the darkness of my room, tears blurring my vision. My heart raced with fear, shame, and confusion. Soon Daniel would return, and I would have to face the truth, about Ethan, about Michael, about myself. I pressed a hand against my chest, whispering into the silence, "What have I done?" But there was no answer. Only the echo of my own voice and the weight of choices I could never undo, and so the story remained unfinished, a fragile secret waiting to shatter, a storm that had only just begun.